Hey everyone, Zach from Trusty Oak here. So I'm here with Lauren Lee, who is our admin specialist here at Trusty Oak, and she and I have been working together on something that we thought you guys would find interesting, and so we just wanted to shoot a quick video to kind of talk about our migration from our old CRMs, which were HubSpot and Tatango, to our new CRM, which is Attio. For a little bit of context, I joined the company in March of this year. My wife and I took over the business, and there were a lot of things that we really liked, and there were a lot of things we wanted to change. And one of the things we wanted to change was we had two CRMs, right? So we basically had a customer facing CRM in HubSpot, and then we had a talent facing CRM into Tango, where we were kind of managing hours and contractors and stuff like that. And I kind of felt like the size of the company we probably could get away with just having one CRM that did it all. And so we considered a bunch of different options, and we considered just merging everything into HubSpot directly since we had a lot of familiarity with that. But ultimately, during my research, I found a company called Attio, which is a relatively new CRM program. I think they've been around for a few years, based out of the UK. And I'd gotten some recommendations from some friends that I trust. So I checked it out, and I liked what I saw. And so I hit up Lauren Lee and JC, and I said, hey, I'm thinking about moving us over to a new CRM, but obviously I want you all to, you're going to be using it quite a bit. I want to make sure that you guys buy into it. So we did a free trial with Attio for a couple weeks. I think they even extended our trial for us, which was great. Yeah, I'd say we kind of fell in love. I think we really liked what we saw. We saw the potential of it. And so, yeah, so that's really what the conversation today is about. So Lauren Lee and I are both going to kind of talk about what our perspective's been like migrating ourselves off of it, off of HubSpot and onto Attio. And we also recently did this for a customer of ours. And so we'll talk about that a little bit. So Lauren Lee, I mentioned some of the reasons that I wanted to change. The one I left out was kind of cost. We were paying for two different CRMs. Now we're still paying for Attio. We're using the pro version, but now we're only paying for one. But could you talk to me a little bit about maybe some of like the complexity of using two different systems, not just like the financial cost, like the time cost?
Yeah, the two CRMs had somewhat different functionality. So you needed both we needed both for our needs. So one was not going to meet them all. We had to have both, which meant you were sharing data in multiple locations and they weren't syncing well together. So you were having to do steps multiple times and having to go to both CRMs to find specific data. It just was not efficient and it wasn't reliable because there's a human error if you're having to input data multiple times. So the struggle was really that we were having to adapt our processes based on their lack of adaptability to us. So really the internal processes were long-winded, definitely room for error, hard to train for others to do. This was just such a inviting change because anything that would allow us to do less steps, rely on those steps and the functionality was really welcome.
Yeah. I feel like when I joined, we have a lot of SOP documents, which is great, especially for a company of our size. We're kind of surprisingly organized in that fashion, but I feel like one of our SOP docs just for the CRM stuff was like 10 pages long or something. And this was mostly the things you were doing kind of on a
Yeah.
daily and weekly basis. How much more condensed do you think that doc is now? That
Oh, it's getting shrunk for sure. Day by day, it's slow. It's getting hacked away. There's so many few platforms we're using, not just the CRMs, but even in the spreadsheets, we're not having to use those as much as well. So yeah, that translates to much shorter SOPs and much easier to have someone else fill in your shoes if you're out of office. They're easy to follow and much less steps. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I want to talk a little bit more, I think, in detail about why we were using two different systems. You kind of said they didn't really meet our needs, but for those who don't know our business model, we basically pair fractional talent with our clients who tend to be business owners, executives, etc. And so even though we're not a marketplace, we're more of a talent agency. We are essentially a two-sided business, right? So we have the talent that we have to manage, and then we have the clients. And so we could talk about in more detail in a little bit kind of how we're using Attio to manage both. But I think it's worth calling that out that most CRMs are really good at one thing, like client management. But as soon as you have a different stakeholder or user base, whether that's like investors or community supporters or something kind of that's just not your typical sales funnel, I think that's where we were running into challenges. And again, I think both tools were good at that one thing and could have done either, but having to have two tools to do it just felt like overkill for a business as small as we.
Yeah, it felt like we were trying to force in our relationships with our contractors as clients, and it's just not that same relationship. So the nitty-gritty of the CRM was really not helpful. We had to use other platforms or other programs to meet those needs. And now with Attio, we're able to do it all in one place.
Yeah, like I think a good specific example would be if we're hiring on a contractor, like are they a deal, right? Like you know what I mean? Like do you treat that as a deal the way you would a sales lead, right? Like
Exactly.
I mean, technically it's a funnel, everything's kind of a funnel, right? But it's like, you know, then do you come up with different funnels or different stages where it's like interviewed is different than like had a sales call, right? And it
Yeah.
just kind of gets messy and trying to mix them together and like creating custom fields that apply, you know, seeing on someone's contact record like date we hired them and you're like, wait, what? And you're like, oh, okay, that's only for right
Yeah.
for contractors.
Yeah. There was no distinguishing the difference in those contacts within the CRM. Yeah.
For sure. So we were on an old system, right? So some people are starting from scratch, which I think we would definitely recommend Attio for that as well. But I think the harder thing to do is to migrate from an existing system, right? And so you did most of the migration, which I think we all agreed internally you were the right person to do it. You were the best suited, most detail oriented person for that. Talk to me a little bit about kind of how you prepared the data, how you got it into Attio, maybe any like hiccups or kind of like things you learned, like trial by fire stuff.
Yeah, I definitely felt like the right person. I was the one that had my hand in all the processes and touching most of the data. So understanding first all of the stuff we needed to store in. Was it financial data? Was it customer data? Was it contractor data, process data, all of it, internal processes? And mapping that out was a huge key step so that we could get an overlying view of everything we'd like to store or at least manage, monitor, and then seeing what would be ideal. In an ideal world, could we put all of this or 80% of this or whatever into a CRM like Attio? And having that completely mapped out was made the transition and the migration really simple in that now we knew all of the fields and attributes and categories we needed within Attio, and maybe they already had them, but some of them we would need to build in. But that made it to where we could import our data so much smoother. The other part that's really interesting is we were able to adapt Attio to our needs. So we were able to create objects and break down our data into ways that made sense to our company. And other CRMs don't really allow that. You have to work with their built-in model. So the migration was feeling like we were using a whole specific CRM just for Trusty Oak. And that was really neat. There was a little bit of hiccup in learning the import process, but doing it a couple of times and figuring out those what failed and how to fix it really teaches you how to learn the program better. Trial and error is the best way to learn, so that was a big part. And then you quickly realize how fast you can do it in the future once you have that background. And then it was super intuitive. Having the commonality between Attio and Notion was really helpful because our team has been familiar with Notion. So there was a level of user experience in Attio that made starting out with the program really simple. Having the trial process was a really important time for us to create test clients, create test projects, mess around within the workflows and see how it all worked so we could feel more familiar, but also understand all the capabilities that were available in Attio and get us kind of excited about, oh, but we could do this too. And oh, this could happen. And this would make life easier if we could do that. So the trial period was really key.
Yeah, and you mentioned Notion, which I want to kind of touch on because I think a lot of people watching this probably use Notion or at least familiar with it. I think the reason I like Notion so much is because it's really flexible, right? So the whole app is built around databases and pages. And so pages can be like entries in databases and you can kind of link stuff together. And to some extent, that's also kind of how Attio is architected. So they have what are called objects. So there would be something like a person object or a company object or a deal object. And then you can create these kind of relationships between those databases. So you can treat a person very differently than how you treat a company, than how you treat a deal, which is pretty standard for most CRMs. But the fact that you can then go and create custom objects that aren't those. So, for example, we have, and I'll show you guys here in a second on our screen, we have invoices. So we track, we have Stripe integration that pushes our invoices in so we can kind of map those to people and companies. We have our talent object, which I think is probably the most important one that we mentioned earlier. We can now treat our incoming contractors differently than we treat our incoming clients in terms of the data we capture, the stages we put them through, the tags, all that fun stuff. We've even started, we created a projects object because we started recently offering flat rate projects, not just the monthly subscription. So, again, it's really that there's a lot of power and flexibility, but at the same time, it's like usable. And I think that's why Notion is so popular is it's both really flexible, but also very simple and kind of user friendly. And I think Attio also hits that sweet spot. I mean, I know there's some really big CRMs like Salesforce, ServiceNow that probably have even more flexibility than Attio, but the usability is kind of where they tend to struggle. You have to hire a consultant to do it. Whereas with Attio, again, this was your first time using it and you figured it out pretty quickly. I've figured it out pretty quickly. Like I think our team has kind of picked it up. So I think it's kind of hard to find a sweet spot between power and simplicity, and I think Notion and Attio both have done a really great job of that.
Yeah, I agree.
Let's see. Actually, before we get to, and we can obviously we can edit all this order wise. Before we get to taking a look at our instance of it, which unfortunately we're probably going to have to blur out most of it because there is a lot of personal data in there, but we can show things like companies and stuff like that. I did want to talk about kind of where are we now in terms of what are we using Attio for, and more importantly, like what have we gained since switching? I think from my perspective, I feel more confident that if someone asks me a question about the business, typically about either a customer or a contractor, I know where to look. Whereas when I first joined the company, I was the newest person here. It's funny to be CEO and be like also the low man on the totem pole, right? The noob. But someone would say, "Hey, is blah 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 a customer of yours, or does blah 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 work for you?" And I'm like, "I have no idea. Let me go ask." And I would try to find it, and then I'd end up slacking you or Bex or JC or whoever, Corey, and I'd be like, "Hey guys, does this person work here? Does this person buy stuff from us?" It's like, do I look in Stripe? Do I look in Harvest? Do I look into Tango? Do I look in HubSpot? Right? Like, do I look in a Google Sheet? There's so many different places. And now I'm like, I know, actually this happened the other day. Someone asked me if a referral of theirs went through. And I said, that sounds really familiar. Let me look it up. And while we're on the phone, I hit the / command, typed their name. I was like, yeah. And they joined June 23rd. It was just, it gave me a lot of confidence as just as the leader of the company, but my role is very like sales and customer facing. And so I need to learn that side of the business and know who those people are. And Attio has really helped with that. What are some of the kind of benefits as like an ops person that you've seen since migrating over?
Well, sort of in the same sense, I'm not customer facing. So when a customer has an issue and I can't potentially get a hold of our customer success manager, don't really need to, because I can go into our platform and go find what's going on with them. Before, that was located in multiple places. So this is so easy. So if a client has a question about their next payment, I can go in and see what our CSM has just spoke with them about, or in the last month, have they had any communication about their subscription? I can go find that out to answer them. It makes the process smoother and quicker, but I can also see a history of what's been happening within the relationship of that client's account with us. And along with the contractor they're working with, I can see all of that back end stuff to understand and potentially help with next steps. So to me, it's such a great for operation standpoint. It's like behind the scenes. On a stage. I'm seeing everything that's happening. I'm seeing the inner workings of the tech behind the play and the actors acting out front. Like I see the whole thing, and it's very helpful to understand. If I walked in and didn't know what play was going on, I immediately know because I can see all of it and I can understand we're in act two, scene three, because it's all right there. That's been a huge part. Again, one location for all that information.
Yeah, for sure. Were there any aha moments for you when we'd made the migration, we'd officially, this is another thing, anytime you transition, it's not just getting into the new thing, it's like getting off of the old thing, right? Being
Yeah.
like, I'm no longer, I know
Yeah.
there was a period of time where you were updating data in 3 places instead of
Yes.
2,
Yes.
right?
The
But
updating
was
in
there any
multiple
aha
places.
moments kind of, yeah, exactly. Were there any aha moments kind of after that where you were like, we're in it and you're like, okay, this is working and here's how I know that it's working. Like I feel better, whatever it is. Yeah.
100%. The automation is awesome because steps that I was having to manually take are happening behind the scenes. They're happening in real time, at the time they need to happen, to where the next person on our team that needs to take action is ready to take action. They're not waiting on a human to get those steps done. And also, as minimal as it sounds, I have less tabs open on my computer on a regular basis. I mean, there were upwards of like 12 tabs open because I would have to work in so many different platforms with regular everyday tasks that were repetitive
Yep.
throughout the day. Now it's really seamlessly in like one location. Um, that's a big one for me. Just seeing the clarity and the simplicity on my screen makes me feel a lot more in control and organized.
Let's take a dive into the platform for a little bit, and then I also want to give some critical feedback of the platform, right? Because it's not perfect. It is it it is the new kid on the block, and so there's definitely some stuff I think it could do better, or I wish it did differently. But I want to be like transparent about that because this is not what we do for a living. We're not Attio spokespeople, but we do want to help our fellow business owners make good decisions, and so that's why we're doing this video. So this is a really great view where I don't think we have to necessarily blur anything out because this is all very publicly available info. But you can see on the side here we have our record objects, and this is kind of what we were talking about earlier. So companies, people, and deals. Those are kind of the big three, the holy trinity of CRMs, right? So that's pretty common to track those things separately. But I mentioned we have some custom objects. So we have an invoices object which pulls in from Stripe. So we send in our Stripe invoice data and then we map those to the companies so we can kind of see revenue in aggregate, which is really nice. And when people have made payments, etc. We have our talent objects. So these are people who have either applied to work with Trusty Oak or are actively working with Trusty Oak and our clients. So we have a different kind of funnel data set for those people. And we can link those back to their person record because at the end of the day, everyone's a person, right? Companies don't just exist without people, and so that's why everything kind of ultimately links back to the people object. And then we have projects. So we recently launched flat rate projects, which are different from our subscriptions, and so we wanted a way to track any projects that we sell just to make sure they're getting fulfilled and that the customers are happy. We've got some lists here, so this is a way to basically drill down on these objects. And so you can see, for example, like referral partners, this can be a combination of people and company objects. And I can say, who have I reached out to and who I haven't reached out to. This is kind of separate from a deal, right? Because I'm not really trying to sell them anything, but I am trying to work with them. And I do want to see, like, have we had initial contact? Have we had Are we closed? Are we active? All that kind of stuff. Some of you might have received a message from me recently where I'm doing a customer discovery tour. So I'm tracking basically who I've reached out to and whether or not they've responded, whether or not we've chatted. So I've got that in there. And so, yeah, and then you've got your basic fields. One of the things that Attio has that's really interesting is it has these like enriched fields. So this will basically, it's kind of like a smart field. It'll try to use a combination of its own internal data and maybe some external data to try to figure out like, we know the company URL, what's their LinkedIn, or when was the last time you talked to this person and how often do you talk, and are your conversations short or are they long? And so it's trying to see like, obviously this is kind of meta, but we have Attio. We have a very strong relationship with Attio because I email them with feature requests all the time is probably why it's saying that. But yeah, so you can kind of see that. And then, of course, you can filter, create views just like you can in Notion. You can do different types of views. So you can do like Kanban style versus table style. I want to hop into, so I don't have to blur out a bunch of stuff. Otherwise, I'd love to show you all these other objects. I want to hop into workflows because that's something Lauren Lee mentioned and that we use a lot. Actually, I do want to hop into calls is a really interesting feature, and I may have to blur this out depending on what it says. But yeah, I'll probably blur this out. Anyway, I want to hop into calls, and I'm going to blur this out here, but the reason I want to show that you have this is there's a list here of every call that we've done where we've used the Zoom Attio integration, and it takes notes. So you've seen probably there's a lot of different tools like Fathom and Otter and Fireflies and all this, and those are all great tools. Attio has their own, and the more important thing is that we don't have to think about it. It just shows up, and it just puts the notes in. And the other thing that's really interesting is the notes you can create a notes template inside of Attio and basically apply it to the notes. So it'll do the long, full transcript thing that a lot of those tools do. But for example, I've been doing these customer discovery calls, and so I asked Bex, who's our head of sales, to basically make a template for the customer discovery call. So when I hit use template, it reformats the insights to kind of match. So again, these are things that exist in other tools, but the fact that it's just built into Attio, it makes my life a lot easier, and I think it also makes Bex's life a lot easier. So now I want to hop into workflows, which I don't mind having unblurred. So basically workflows, it's another way to say automations, but basically you can see there's a bunch of different workflows that we've created inside of Attio. So Lauren Lee creates a lot of these. I create some of them. Typically it's taking an object like a person and an object like a company and updating them at the same time. So typically something changes on one and we want it to change on the other. And so that's what we're doing. Or for example, mapping an invoice to a customer, like we might know the email that the invoice came through, but it doesn't that the invoice object isn't a person object, right? So it's like, how do I know which person this invoice was tied to? Well, I look at their email and I go find their email, match it, right? And so if you've ever used Zapier or Make or N8N, you'll probably recognize some of these kind of visual workflows, right? So for example, you've got like your trigger object, your trigger action, right? You can filter, you can do conditional logic, and then you ultimately get a result. So you can update like a record here. What's another good one? We have like the Slack one. This one's kind of interesting. So we were using Slack. Originally, we were using Slack to tell Lauren Lee to do something. Now it's almost the opposite. So Lauren Lee and Corey, who's our CSM, will do the things in Attio, and then Slack gets a notification more so the rest of the company just knows what's going on. So I go, oh, that customer wanted to upgrade or downgrade or whatever. I can just see that, and they're not having to do an extra step where they say, hey, by the way, this customer wanted to do it. They're just doing the work. So like everything from really basic stuff like Slack notifications. Lauren Lee, what's a good? I know there was one I saw the other day that was pretty intense where you had like a lot of branches.
There is one that's creating a new deal or a new project when a deal is moved to close. That one right there.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So he gets down to here. See if I can zoom out a little. Yeah. So basically, you can see there's a lot of different steps. Time delay is a really interesting one, right? So sometimes you're waiting for another app to catch up. So you can add in like time delay, you can add in filters, and then you have like a switch, like if this, then that, otherwise do this, right? So again, all this stuff's pretty straightforward. The number of automations you have is based on your plan, but I feel like the number is something super high that we're probably never going to hit. I hope we hit that because that means we're selling millions and millions of things, and I'll gladly pay tens of dollars for that. So again, you've got all this stuff built in. Lauren Lee, before you joined Trusty Oak and or before we started using Attio and Zapier, I feel like you hadn't really built any
No.
like automation workflows or anything, right?
No, the concept was there of like, this would be nice to be able to do, but then never having to actual put it in action.
She's she's not coming from like a software development background or like a workflow automation operations background. She just figured it out. And I think that's important to say just because I think a lot of people are intimidated by this stuff and it can be intimidating. And I think we'll actually talk about that in our like hot takes section of the video. But yeah, it's ultimately like pretty intuitive once you kind of wrap your head around how it works. Then you can start to be like, well, what else can I do? And you can kind of see again if we go back to our workflows list, we've got probably about a dozen or so, yeah, maybe 10 that we're running. And I'm always thinking like, oh, I wish I had this. I can
Hmm.
either go get it manually or maybe even build a workflow to do it. So that's really the main things I wanted to show you guys. But there's all kinds of cool stuff. You can use it for task management. So Corey and Lauren Lee use this for like updating customer data. Yeah, we just use a lot of different stuff. All right, the last two things I want to talk about. One is our hot take section. So like, what do we think Attio could do better or differently? So the one thing I keep bugging them about is they don't have their own forms. So, like lead collection forms, website forms, stuff like that. And so we are using a tool called Fill Out, and Fill Out's great. The free tier is really good, and they also have some really cool paid features. It's really user friendly, but there is a part of me that's kind of like, why don't we just use an Attio form? Like, it feels weird to have to build a form in one tool and then integrate it with another. They do have a direct integration, which is part of why we chose Fill Out in the first place. But, you know, again, it feels like something that HubSpot has a built-in form, and I feel like a lot of mature CRMs do. So hopefully they'll release that soon. I know they just raised a bunch of money, so hopefully they spend one of those $52 million on building a form for me. So that was kind of my main thing. And then I know you had some on building the workflows we talked about before. What was
Yeah, there was a couple of features that I felt were needed or missing from the workflows. Some triggers being tasks triggering some starting a workflow, and also emails being sent starting a workflow. Those are still in the works. But I believe Attio has heard from their users and what they're asking for, and they're working on that one. We've been told it's coming. So while we're learning what would be more helpful, they're also listening and working to get those updates in. So that was appreciative. I think the the app just has a lot of AI features that I haven't really explored yet. So I feel like they are still exploring that as well on their end. So my hot take was that maybe they can improve some of their AI functionality, being that it's a little bit more user friendly for not their built-in like what they already have currently available. But I think they could develop it a little bit more. But that's going to come. I mean, AI is developing everywhere, so.
Yeah, for sure. I my biggest gripe with the existing stuff, because I complain about lacking features, which every customer does. I've been listening to customers complain about features my whole career, so I totally get it. I did think that the building the workflows the first couple times we did it, I felt like the way they nest and label the attributes that you're trying to use to kind of either update or trigger a workflow, like it once you realize it, it makes sense because it's like person name.
Mhm.
But there was just something about like we always had a hard time figuring out like where we just want the name field, and it was like buried 3 layers
Yeah,
deep. But it is technically, if you think about the data architecture, it makes sense,
yeah,
but it's not intuitive, right? Like it's
yeah,
one of those things where It's kind of like the Tesla door handle. Like when you think about it, it makes sense, but when you use it, it doesn't make sense,
Yeah,
right? You're like,
yeah. And if you
it's like,
don't use
oh
it
no,
on
you
a
put your
regular
thumb
basis,
here, and yeah,
yes,
yeah,
exactly.
exactly. If you use a Tesla door, I have a Tesla, right? If I use a Tesla door handle every day, makes total sense. My friends who sit in my car once a month are like, I hate your door handles. Right?
Yeah, yeah. In theory, you're not building your workflows every day. Those are once built, and then you move on, and maybe like a few months later, you build another one. So it should be a little bit more intuitive for people that are not in it all the time.
Yeah, and I think maybe having an easier way to test run those workflows. Like I know
Yeah,
we use Zapier a lot too, and
yeah,
we're always having to test and then go delete the data because we screwed it up the first time. And but again, the cool thing is you spend our thought process, maybe even with this whole migration, is like let's spend a couple hours on the front end, and we're going to save hundreds of hours
yes.
over the year, right?
100%. And I think that's also been the aha moment for the both of us, especially after having worked with a client to get them set up in Attio was, oh man, the more we work in it, the better we're getting at it, the more fluent we are in their language. And being able to translate that ability to others is going to be so helpful for anyone that's interested in this platform that needs a more adaptable CRM. Like the smoothness of their transition is going to be better than ours. And we love, that's part of what our company loves to do, is to help others get going and get more efficient and get on a faster growth stream. So this would be one of those steps. And that seems like a really exciting new venture. There was one thing I thought of when we were talking that I didn't bring up, and it was how helpful the automations can be for teams that are spread across the country, different time zones, because that whole delay thing in automations, but also being that I like when Bex was working in New Zealand, we were not able to contact her and be in, have regular, like easy access to her. So having these things automate the tasks built in to where she can log in and see what needs to happen, what has happened, and not, there's no question, like if an SP came in,
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be ready for her to go on her next steps. There's no need to like have a meeting with one of us, get any other confirmations. Like it makes our team work so smooth across time zones, different states, different countries. um I don't know, that feels like something that can be relatable to people.
Yeah, for sure. And that's a great segue into the shameless plug, which is if you need help setting up Attio, we have people kind of on our team that are willing to do that. We also have a referral link that we'll post, anywhere that this video is posted. I told the folks at Attio there is a referral program, and I told them I want to win. There's the top prize is a new Apple Studio display, and I said I'm going to be the first person to win it. And I think they said only one other person's won it so far. So prove me right. Go down in the comments, find the link, sign up for Attio. And if enough of you do it, I'll get to upgrade my 20-year-old Apple Studio display to the new one. But yeah, I really want to thank everyone who watched this video. This is a new thing that we're trying to do, is a little more behind the scenes on how we're building our own business, because we're ultimately in the business of helping other small and mid-sized businesses build their companies. And so every time I've talked about this to friends, they've been really interested in it. And I thought, why not shoot a video about it to make your all's lives easier? So thanks for watching, and we'll hope to see you soon.